the papers, and of course tomorrow the parliamentary term resumes. This is a big story in the Sunday Times this morning. NATO is going to urge Keir Starmer to significantly increase spending on air and missile defence. This is the big headline in the Sunday Times this morning. NATO warns the UK over ballistic missile threats. We have spoken at great length about the amount of GDP we spend on defence. We're spending about 2.3% of GDP on defence. Many people are saying it needs to go up to 2.5%. I personally think it should be 3.5 up to 5%. But essentially, there is going to be a formal request made by NATO when the military alliance issues members with their updated force requirements. And many NATO countries, including the United States, are saying to Britain, come on, pull your finger out. You need to put more cash in.
Yeah, it's true. And in fact, this is a bit of a scary read, I think, David, because it's talking about the range of missiles and that it'd be pretty easy to, send a missile to London from somewhere in the Middle East, where there are a number of rogue states, of course, at the moment. And, of course, there's going to be pressure from the new Trump presidency, I think, to really up spending on defence.
I would agree.
So, yeah, a pretty scary read there in the Sunday Times.
And, of course, the Strategic Defence Review, many people are saying, why are we waiting so long for this defence review? Because we've actually left ourselves in a position of enormous vulnerability. I mean, if you remember back to Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the Chief of Defence Staff, which was last month, he said the world is facing a third nuclear age. This is also, as part of the SDR, the Strategic Defence Review, there is a NATO blueprint called the Capability Target 2025. As you rightly say, we have been concentrating on nuclear weapons, but actually these other missiles can be equipped with conventional warheads, but they can travel so fast that what they're saying is that Britain could be hit by a missile from anywhere in the world. In 15 years' time, they're saying a ballistic missile will be able to hit Britain from anywhere in the world, but it's a very expensive problem to fix. I would suggest that actually multiple governments have been asleep at the wheel.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think they've been stuck in this sort of Cold War mindset with the focus on nuclear, when actually we need to be thinking about the range of these non-nuclear missiles, and also whether, some sort of naval vessel coming close to the UK could potentially be a threat. I think the issue about it being pushed into the long grass is the lack of money. And, we're seeing that.
But they've just stolen all this money from everyone with 20 billion, hold another 20 billion, 40 billion. Actually, and I said this to you earlier on, if we don't have defence of the realm, we have nothing. It's all very well having net zero, but there's no country left.
I agree, but I think this government has an ambitious list of things it wants to achieve, and it can't do them all at once.
Shouldn't defence come first?
Well, I think defence is very important, but then they will probably argue that it's more important to get more teachers in schools, to try and deal with the waiting lists in the NHS. And, of course, we've got this Social Care Commission that's coming up.
Which has also kicked it into the long grass till 2028.
Again, I think that's because of lack of money, because,
Is it a lack of money or a lack of political will?
Well, I think, they're hoping we get some growth. It's not looking very likely at the moment, is it? And that, the tax take will go up and we will have more money to spend on those kinds of ambitions.
Just looking at this, and you're right, it's a really sobering read this morning. I hate to give you some bad news, but Iran has an arsenal of approximately 3,000 ballistic missiles. These things travel at 4,600 miles an hour. And also Russia has more hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles as well. They go at Mach 10. That's incredibly fast. So there is no warning.
No, and do you remember the 1st of October when Iran sent 200 ballistic missiles to Israel?
I do.
And apparently our defence minister was in Cyprus at the time, and that was a real wake-up call for him. And incredibly, Israel shot most of them down. Now, I'm not sure we have that sort of capability at the moment.
Well, we don't, and also Israel is a discrete country, i.e. it is relatively small, so you can have the Iron Dome. But also, just looking at the way that, say, the United States relies on the United Kingdom, initially, and you're right, Akrotiri, which is our strategic base over there, I think that was the wake-up call. But when Tehran launched its first round of strikes, we eliminated the drones, the cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. This was a US alliance with the United Kingdom. By the time of the second round, we were demoted because basically the US can't rely on us because we don't have the capability.
Well, exactly, and I think that's one of the dangers, that the UK will just become, one of the faces in the background, that it doesn't have a place at the table.
I think it's deeply concerning. I think politicians, I get your point about the health service and education, but actually, I think defence is right up there. And when you talk to people in government, they are deeply nervous that we have basically sleptwalked into this. You know, when you look at other stuff, I remember back in June, General Sir Patrick Sanders saying our UK tank fleet is embarrassingly small. We are no longer a tier 1 nation. That's what many people are saying. And so, actually, I think the politicians have to level with the public. And if you remember, when Labour came into power, they also enacted 500 million quid's worth of cuts and cut all of these major programmes. They cut HMS Albion, Bulwark, a Type 23 frigate, the Chinooks, a Puma medium lift. There is no plan for a replacement whatsoever. It is very short-sighted. And I think things like defence, actually, should probably be cross-party and a 20-year strategic plan.
I think there's a real issue about modernisation of public services, and, you know, we can include defence in that we've got creaking infrastructure that needs massive investment, and defence is part of that problem as well, isn't it?
Why have we got creaking infrastructure?
Well, you could argue that austerity caused it, you know, in the last decade, COVID potentially, and, you know, inflation has been incredibly unwelcome, hasn't it? But, of course, that's been partly because of COVID, and it's just meant that there's less money to invest in public services.
I also think it's been just poor fiscal management by the last government as well, and, of course, we've seen inflation go up, the real-life costs of people's trying to pay their mortgage, for example. And we've seen the devastation that has caused. By the way, let's move on, shall we, and talk about the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. This is also going to make you choke on your cornflakes or your ricicles this morning. Sunday Telegraph, this is about net zero. Net zero drive will raise cost of holidays, right? I think all of us looking to get away. A new net zero flight tax on airlines risks adding hundreds of pounds to the cost of family holidays. So this is to do with their sustainable aviation fuel. So basically a new mandate which says that you have to have 2% green fuel. That goes up to 10% of green fuel, 22% of green fuel in 2040. So lumping even bigger costs onto the airlines, which will pass it on to the consumer. I would like to know, who voted for net zero?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a big problem, I think. It's called sustainable aviation fuel. This was a new measure that was brought in on the 1st of January. Now, you know, there are wildly conflicting figures. One figure says that it could add 20% to the cost of a holiday by 2040. That's £302 for a family of 4. Another figure here says it could be as little as £9.40 per ticket by 2040. I think the problem is there's not much of it available at the moment.
Exactly.
Not
and
much of it is manufactured. And so what the government are expecting is that as demand increases, more will get manufactured and the price of it will go down. But we shall see.
That's very bizarre logic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that if you know, you're really invested in kind of green technology, the idea is that you've got to kickstart it, and
at what cost, though, to the consumer? This is the bit that it just feels to me you've got increasingly draconian government saying you will not have a gas boiler, you will not fly, you will not do X, Y and Z. And actually, at the end of the day, the government works for the people, for the punters, and the punters don't want net zero in this way. And I've said this a great deal, which is I think you can embrace the idea of net zero, but this artificial timeline of 2030, when you've got India, China, Russia building all of these power stations, and we, of course, are basically wearing Hessian underwear.
Yes. I mean, I agree with you on that. I think the timing is a big problem here, that 2030 sounded OK, you know, 10, 15 years ago, but as we're coming close to it, because of the cost of living crisis, I just think there's no appetite for wearing those Hessian underpants.
Certainly not from me. Let me be very clear. We'll talk more about net zero. Actually, get in touch. What do you think about this? So now you can't even go away. You're going to have all these levies. There's a plastic levy coming in as well. I don't think anyone has actually voted for net zero. Let me know your thoughts on that. Let's move on now. Yesterday, we spoke a lot about the dissatisfaction with Keir Starmer. This is the front page of the Mail. Starmer will be out of number 10 in a year. This is what I said yesterday. The level of dissatisfaction with the Labour government, not just from the voters, but also, I think, traditional Labour voters are very unhappy with the Labour Party and the direction of travel from Keir Starmer. I think a lot of people in the Labour Party are sharpening their knives. But this is going to make very tricky reading for Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I mean, there's talk of Andrea versus Wes, isn't there, in the press actually this weekend?
Yeah.
That, you know, she made a comment that she was in competition with Wes Streeting. That's Angela Rayner. Yes.
Crikey, Angela Rayner as Prime Minister. There's a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've had a disastrous start, really, haven't they? Winter fuel allowance was the first announcement that was made, and turned a lot of people against the new Labour government. What's happening around inheritance tax with the farmers, private school fees, of course, is causing a lot of issues at the moment, and all of the freebies that they had. I saw there's a piece on council tax being covered by the public purse for Rachel Reeves' second home, etc.
I mean, that makes terrible reading.
It does.
What
yes.
was it, 10 grand?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the argument is that MPs are entitled to claim those sorts of costs.
Which they are.
But they've gone off to a really bad start. And if you compare it to the 1997 beginning of the Tony Blair government, when there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement and there was a real kind of wave of positivity, we've had a real wave of negativity, haven't we? It's been so different, such a contrast. And how much of that is down to Keir Starmer's leadership, and how much of it is down to the fact that we're in a kind of difficult post-COVID period?
Do you know, I just think he doesn't get it. He's so robotic. He trots out the same lines. Rachel Reeves, the same thing, 20 billion hole, fixing their foundations. He doesn't seem to understand that a lot, and you're right about the winter fuel allowance. I think it's the most absurd policy to bring in as your first policy, where you're penalising elderly people. Then you go on some ideological campaign where you put VAT on private schools, which means that kids are going to end up in the public sector. In fact, I was being told that up in Scotland there are no schools in certain areas, and there are kids that can't get into the state system because they haven't thought this through. The money doesn't work. Then you attack the farmers, and so then we've got food insecurity issues. I mean, who's advising them?
Absolutely, who is advising them? I think the problem with Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves is they're both kind of technocrats, really, and there's a lack of charisma. And
that's the difference with Blair, because he was very charismatic, particularly in 97.
It just shows you how important charisma and performance ability really is for politicians, but also getting the right advice and, putting the right messages across. I wonder if they can turn it round in 2025. I hear what you're saying about this potential, Keir Starmer out within a year. I think that's partly because we got so used to that with the last government, didn't we? The Labour Party would say we're determined to bring in stability, and with such a huge majority, it would seem very odd, the idea that Keir Starmer might be out in a year. But, we're hearing from Labour politicians that are saying that they're very frustrated about what they're hearing on the doorstep.
Well, look at the MRP poll I spoke about yesterday, done by Stonehaven. Labour loses 133 seats at the moment. So many of those young Labour MPs who think, oh, I've got a job for life, now thinking, oh, hang on, maybe I haven't got a job for life. So it will be fascinating. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Thank you for the moment, Richard. That got me thinking this morning about the threat to Keir Starmer. Who or what do you think is the biggest threat to Keir Starmer? Is it the Conservative Party? Is it the rise of Reform UK? Is it international affairs? Is it his own party? Is it those Labour MPs who are thinking, hang on a minute, I don't like the direction of travel? Is it Wes Streeting? Is it Angela Rayner sharpening their knives? I think he is under threat. The question is, who or what is the biggest threat to Keir Starmer?